Have you ever wondered about the unseen, the unexplained? Those whispers of phenomena that defy easy categorization, yet somehow feel, well, incredibly real.
It's a question that really captures the imagination, hasn't it? Often just pushed aside into folklore.
Exactly, or dismissed as superstition. But today we're taking a truly fascinating journey, a deep dive into a time when serious scientists actually dared to explore these very mysteries.
We're going back to the early 20th century into the world of psychical research.
And our guide. It's volume 20 of the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research, an actual historical document. And let me tell you, it is a goldmine of surprising facts and really meticulous investigations.
And our mission for this deep dive, as always, is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the insights from this incredibly rich source.
Yeah, what can we learn from it today?
It's not just about what they saw, but understanding how these pioneers tackled such perplexing questions. You know, the scientific rigor they aimed for.
And why it still matters.
Yeah.
Or why should we care now?
Precisely. They were trying to build solid foundations for understanding what they called the parapsyche.
Parapsyche.
I like that. Yeah, and they were actively pushing back against that common idea that, oh, one person is as good as another in these kinds of complex investigations.
No, they believed in method.
They really did. They saw themselves as charting new territory for science, a proper scientific pursuit of the, well, seemingly impossible.
So prepare for some truly surprising stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about everything from meticulously documented telepathy experiments.
Where emotions seem to be transferred. That's a big one.
Yeah, and alleged spirit communications that kind of eerily predicted tomorrow's newspaper headlines.
Which is just mind-boggling when you think about it.
Right. We'll also delve into mysterious apparitions, things that just defied explanation, and even these intense debates over the authenticity of spirit photography.
Yes, spirit photography. Always controversial.
Definitely. It's going to be a deep dive filled with aha moments, some genuine head scratchers, and plenty for you to mull over. Let's start unpacking this incredible material. Okay, so to really set the stage, let's talk about the Society for Psychical Research itself, the SPR. Because when we think of psychical research today, it might conjure up images of, fringe groups or maybe wild, unsubstantiated claims.
Yeah, that's often the perception.
But this organization back then was far from that. It was founded on the principle of applying rigorous scientific methods.
Real science, applied to phenomena, often dismissed out of hand.
And you find truly prominent figures involve names like Sir J.J. Thomson.
A Nobel laureate, no less. And their vice president.
And Sir Oliver Lodge, a really renowned physicist who was their chairman.
Right. These weren't just hobbyists. This was a serious scientific quest for them.
So what does that tell us about the intellectual climate back then, that figures like these would lend their gravitas to this field?
That's a great question. I think it really speaks to the pioneering spirit of the era. Their core objective was incredibly ambitious.
It was.
To unveil the hidden truth, as they put it, and build those solid foundations for understanding the parapsyche, basically, the human mind and its potential, maybe extended faculties.
Going beyond the known limits.
Exactly. And it was a direct counter to the prevailing skepticism that just dismissed it all as superstition or, something anyone could do without proper training.
Right, that idea that one person is as good as another.
The SPR explicitly rejected that. They were committed to methodological approaches, insisting that proper scientific investigation was paramount.
It shows a real tension within science itself, doesn't it? How do you rigorously investigate things that just don't fit the current paradigms?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what does that say about the limits of scientific understanding at any given time? They saw themselves as not just researchers, but really as trailblazers.
And trailblazing, especially in science, is rarely cheap.
Huh? No, definitely not.
The Society's financial realities are actually quite telling. You get glimpses from their annual general meetings, the raw numbers.
Yeah, the practical side.
For instance, in one year, their balance was, pretty low. And it even included a significant loan they had to take from their own endowment fund just to, stay afloat.
£100 back then was quite a sum.
Right. And the sources explicitly mentioned the severe impact of the war on printing costs. That was a constant strain.
Oh, printing was hugely expensive. That really hit them hard.
So less Ghostbusters and maybe more budget busters for the SPR.
That's a good way to put it. It's a powerful reminder that even groundbreaking research has very earthly financial realities to deal with.
Absolutely. And you look a bit deeper into their membership dynamics, you see this pragmatism playing out too.
Oh, so?
Well, they faced a net decrease in members in that period, but here's a telling detail. New members elected were actually paying higher fees, 2 guineas versus 1 guinea for associates.
Ah, so they were maybe getting more committed members.
Seems like it. Plus, a good number of associates became full members, so it suggests a core of committed, higher contributing supporters.
Focusing on quality over quantity, perhaps.
Exactly. And that's backed up by their decision to suspend the election of new associates altogether during the war, citing the need for strict economy.
Makes sense. It shows an organization that, despite these grand ambitions, was actually incredibly practical about managing its limited resources.
Yet, that financial crunch didn't stop them trying to engage the public.
Oh, really? How did they do that?
It's fascinating. The society secretary was apparently frequently asked by local clubs and debating societies to provide lecturers.
So it wasn't just an internal academic thing.
No. There was clearly a broader public interest in psychical research, and the SPR was actively trying to meet that demand, bringing their findings and their scientific approach to a wider audience.
Getting the word out there.
Yeah, they were very much out there trying to inform and educate, which, as you can imagine, often put them in direct contact with some, well, challenging and controversial figures.
Exactly. And those challenges were particularly clear when the society dealt with mediums.
Right, the people actually demonstrating the phenomena.
While they were always willing to investigate, they absolutely insisted on what they called absolutely necessary test conditions.
Strict controls.
Very strict. A classic example is the case of a Miss Bessonnet. She was a medium, but she simply refused to submit to these conditions.
So what happened?
The whole investigation just fell through. They couldn't proceed without the controls they felt were needed.
It raises that big question, doesn't it? How do you verify claims, especially extraordinary ones, when the subjects themselves sometimes resist the scrutiny you need for proper science?
It really does. It speaks volumes about the skepticism and rigor they tried to bring, even if it meant walking away from potentially interesting cases. They wouldn't compromise on method.
So given that commitment to scientific rigor, what kinds of tools did they actually use? I mean, we're talking early 20th century tech here.
Right, but they were trying to be as cutting edge as possible for the time.
For investigating physical phenomena, they had some pretty ingenious lab equipment. You have to picture this.
Like what?
Weighing boards mounted on spiral springs, designed to objectively measure really subtle weight variations during mediumistic sittings.
Ah, trying to catch levitation or changes in the medium's weight objectively.
Exactly. And these movements would then be registered by mirror galvanometers, maybe in another room even.
Clever. Using light beams.
Yeah, deflections recorded on photographic paper by a beam of light. They were really trying to capture quantifiable data on things that seemed impossible.
It makes you realize how dedicated they were to getting hard data, not just anecdotes.
Totally. Even on the seemingly impossible.
And they were incredibly inventive with specific devices, too, trying to enhance their measurements.
Such as?
There was the writing magnet, or Schreibemagnet in German. It was designed for timing and recording vibrations. The journal notes its multitude of uses.
So precise timing of subtle movements.
Right? Allows for that temporal analysis. It's also interesting to see what they understood about light in experiments.
Okay.
They commonly used red illumination, probably understanding its properties for dark adapted vision, or maybe thinking it wouldn't interfere with phenomena.
Right, standard seance stuff, almost.
But they expressed poor hopes for using ultraviolet light in their investigations.
Interesting. Why not? Did they say?
Not explicitly why, but it just underscores the technological constraints they faced and that empirical trial and error approach they had to take, pushing boundaries with the tools they had.
They weren't just observing, they were trying to engineer ways to capture these really elusive effects.
Exactly.
And it wasn't just about lab equipment either. Their intellectual toolkit was equally impressive and broad.
Meaning?
We learned that Mr. Harry Price, a famous investigator himself, later on made this really generous gesture. He loaned his magnificent collection of books on magic and witchcraft to the Society's rooms.
Wow, how big was it?
About 1,500 items, including really rare works like Scott's discovery of witchcraft.
That's incredible. So they weren't just looking at the phenomena in isolation.
No, this wasn't just for casual reading. It showed the breadth of their inquiry. They recognized that to understand the potential supernormal, you also had to understand the history of deception, the cultural context of magic and belief.
Understanding fraud and human psychology was just as important.
Definitely. You needed to know the tricks of the trade, so to speak.
What really stands out from all this, for me, is the sheer dedication. Applying rigorous scientific tools and principles to stuff that was often just dismissed as subjective or superstitious.
Yeah, it underscores that pioneering spirit.
They wanted objective evidence, quantifiable data, a systematic understanding, even when facing things that seemed to defy physics and biology as they knew it.
That commitment to empirical investigation in such a challenging area, it's really a remarkable legacy.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, how much our own modern methods might be missing when we encounter things that don't fit neatly into our current boxes.
Okay, so we've seen the serious scientific foundation the SPR tried to build. That value they placed on objective measurement and a broad understanding of human experience.
Right, setting the stage.
But with these ambitious goals and their specialized tools, what did they actually discover when they turned their focus inward to the mysteries of the human mind itself?
Telepathy and dreams. This is where it gets really fascinating.
For me, too. Let's dive into their groundbreaking work here, particularly the detailed research of Dr. F.H. Van Loon and Dr. Weinberg.
Okay. They were SPR members, relatively new ones, actually, when their report came out.
And their goal was incredibly clear: to determine the laws of telepathic communication.
Not just observe it, but figure out how it worked. That's ambitious.
Totally. They weren't just observing. They were trying to build a scientific framework for something most people would just, well, dismiss outright.
And their experimental setup. Remarkably strict, especially given the subject.
How so?
They took numerous precautions to eliminate any normal sensory cues. For instance, questions were asked in an absolutely indifferent form and voice. No emotional inflection.
Right.
The person receiving the thoughts, was blindfolded.
Standard practice, maybe.
Yes, but crucial. And also, no contact whatever between the two persons. The agent, the sender, didn't even touch the recipient's chair.
Really isolating them.
Completely. Dr. Weinberg acted as the agent, concentrating the thoughts, while Dr. Van Loon meticulously took notes.
So a two-person team controlling the variables.
Right. That level of control was aimed at eliminating all normal explanations, leaving only the possibility of, a supernormal transfer of information.
It's a testament to their commitment to rigor in a very, very slippery field.
Definitely.
And the results they documented are really quite compelling.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to the role of emotion.
Ah, yes, the emotional element. What did they find?
They found a significant difference between emotional and non-emotional sensations. Their conclusion was that the emotional element was, well, crucial for success.
So feelings transferred better than neutral thoughts.
Exactly. They got positive results in what they called mood experiments. They give this chilling example. The negative mood of terror was described very distinctly by the recipient.
Wow. Not just, I feel bad, but terror. That's specific.
Right. So it wasn't just a random guess. There was a powerful, clear transmission of a specific feeling. It suggests that maybe the intensity of the feeling, rather than just the mental image, is what creates the connection.
That's a fascinating insight, isn't it? Emotion as the carrier wave, almost.
And beyond emotions, they explored various other sensory and cognitive transfers.
Like taste. I remember reading that.
They did. They tried transmitting tastes: sweet, sour, bitter. The recipients sometimes described them with intriguing phrases like a prickling taste or it is coming, wait a moment.
But it wasn't very successful, was it?
No. They concluded that taste, being one of our least developed organs of sense, proved least fit for transmission. Which kind of makes sense. Taste is pretty complex chemically.
True. What about vision? Shapes and colors?
They tried that too. Experiments with shapes, like a triangle or an angle, and colors blue silk on white, yellowish salmon color.
And?
Their finding was that shapes are transferred better than shades of color. Possibly because, again, our sense of color is maybe far less developed for this kind of transfer than our ability to distinguish shapes.
Interesting. So structure over quality, maybe.
Yeah. Imagine trying to send blue silk on white mentally and having someone get that right. The challenges are immense.
Definitely.
They even did card guessing experiments. Those had mixed success.
Right, like guessing suits or numbers.
Yeah. A queen of spades might be guessed as a king, or a nine of diamonds as clubs. Close, but not quite.
So not perfect hits all the time.
No. But what's fascinating is the recipient's self-awareness. At one point they said, I guessed too quickly in the previous cases. I intend to do it more slowly.
Ah, so they felt they could improve their own process. It shows a dynamic within the experiment.
Exactly, not just a static test.
Yeah.
And maybe the most striking were the pain transfer experiments.
Pain transfer, how did that work?
The agent would say, prick themselves with a pin,
Ouch.
and the recipient, blindfolded and with no contact, would then report feeling prickling pain in the corresponding body part.
Whoa. That goes beyond mental images or emotions. That suggests a physical, physiological response being transferred.
It's truly remarkable, if accurate. Really pushes the boundary.
Building on that, the Rubini experiments they mentioned are particularly illuminating too.
Rubini, who is that?
Eugen de Rubini. He was described as a telepathist who'd had great success in Holland.
Okay.
He found he had the most success with strongly thinking people, especially when they became emotional during the session.
There's that emotional element again. Crucial.
Absolutely reinforces it. But interestingly, in contrast, when Miss Annie Feckin tried similar Rubini experiments at the SPR, they were more or less unsuccessful.
What is the difference?
The researchers put it down to a lack of passivity on her part. They thought maybe her routine of doing public seances had trained her to be more active, less receptive.
Ah, so maybe being a good sender isn't the same as being a good receiver.
Exactly. It's a fascinating distinction. Is successful telepathy about raw mental power, or is it more about specific states of consciousness and emotional resonance?
A blend of subjective experience and observable effect.
Which really challenges purely material views of God, doesn't it?
Definitely. So if we pull all that together,
Hmm.
the key takeaways from Van Loon and Weinberg seem to be.
Well, firstly, the crucial importance of an emotional charge in the sender's thoughts.
Got it. And secondly,
For the percipient, the receiver, maybe a more diffuse or passive consciousness makes them more receptive to these elusive signals.
that idea of mental receptivity, it keeps coming up in psychical research, doesn't it?
It does. It implies our minds might be much more interconnected than we typically imagine, especially when we're in certain states. Hashtag the realm of dreams and premonitions.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now. From those controlled, structured experiments to the less controlled, but maybe equally compelling, spontaneous stuff, the realm of dreams and premonitions.
Right. Harder to pin down scientifically, but they offer these incredible glimpses into, well, information crossing boundaries.
Boundaries of normal perception, yeah.
What's truly fascinating here is that potential for information transfer across time, even, and across consciousness, popping up in dreams.
Like Mr. Draper's detailed dream. That one stood out.
Exactly. He dreamt of a Miss Coleman by some water. A white spider bites her, causing a ring to drop, and there are square blocks of hewn stone at the bottom of the water. Very specific imagery.
Okay, sounds like a vivid dream. But what's the connection?
Here's the kicker. Miss Coleman later confirmed she had read a story about St. Bride after seeing Mr. Draper the day before his dream.
And the story.
It contains similar elements. Stone blocks, a woman by water, a ring lost in water.
Wow. Okay, the spider isn't there, but the overlap is remarkable.
It really is. It leaves you wondering about the interconnectedness of minds, almost like information can just seep across mental barriers, even into our dreams. Where did that come from?
It's baffling. Speaking of dreams, Mrs. Forster's studies in dreams are really unique, too.
She had that ability to control them, right?
Yeah, an unusual ability to control her dreams to some extent. She could even apparently prolong flying dreams by using a specific formula about the law of gravitation.
That's incredible, like lucid dreaming before the term was really widespread.
Exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
And she wasn't just passively experiencing dreams. She actively rejected Freud's then prevalent view that every dream is just wish fulfillment.
She had her own theories based on her own direct experience.
Right. Active engagement with her dream state.
Her insights also go into the nature of visions, making a really crucial distinction.
Between what?
Between hypnagogic hallucinations, those images you see just as you're falling asleep, which she thought were not related to any external source.
Okay, just the brain doing its thing.
And what she called experiences of the early borderland state. These, she argued, carried a distinct certainty that they come from without, from an external source.
That raises a really important question. How do we tell the difference? How do we discern the origin of our internal perceptions?
Is it all self-generated? Or can external influences truly impress themselves on our minds, especially in those twilight states?
It pushes the boundaries of how we define perception itself.
It really does.
And Mrs. P's compelling presentiment certainly leans towards something external, wouldn't you say?
Tell us about that one again.
She experienced this sudden, incredibly strong feeling that something was wrong, just out of the blue.
Okay, a gut feeling.
But so powerful it compelled her to go home immediately, even though she had a lot to do. She arrived just as her father was taken dangerously ill. He died 16 hours later, and her mother had apparently been wishing I were there.
Wow. That uncanny timing and that powerful, undeniable urge. It makes cases like that so hard to dismiss as just coincidence.
It feels like a warning, doesn't it?
Ah,
A precognition that meant she wasn't absent at a crucial time.
it really does. And then you have Miss Nancy Sinclair, whose impressions are another fascinating category.
How were hers different?
They often occurred in a normal waking state, apparently. They'd rise to consciousness, generally in rather a fragmentary way, but sometimes they came through as perfectly definite messages about future events.
Future events, like what?
A specific, striking example. She had an impression of a telegram coming from Mrs. T.
Okay.
Literally 2 minutes later, an express letter from her wife arrived, and she couldn't have seen anyone approaching the house.
Whoa. The timing and specificity again. Remarkable.
It suggests this subtle, maybe continuous flow of information just at the edge of normal awareness, hinting at a reality where future events might cast a kind of shadow into the present.
And her abilities seemed to deepen over time, didn't they? The sources mention this trance state.
Yes, a possibly precognitive trance state she entered on one occasion, October 10th, 1921.
What was that like?
In this state, she was described as still more sensitive to sounds. Apparently, even a ticking wristwatch disturbed her. Her writing became laborious. She herself said, "It's all different. I can't write any faster."
A distinct shift in her state.
And what's truly intriguing is that subsequent occurrences of this unique trance state were reportedly in connection with evidential cases of precognition.
So the trance seemed linked to getting future information.
That's the implication, a deepening of her abilities, perhaps direct access to future information, which, if true, is an absolutely extraordinary faculty.
Okay, moving even further now into the unseen. Let's explore the complex, often controversial world of mediumship and apparitions.
Right, where the SPR ventured beyond just mental phenomena into what many believe were actual communications from the deceased.
And a key figure here, mentioned often in Volume 20, is Mrs. Osborne Leonard and her primary control, Fida,
Ah, yes, Fida. How is she described?
as a childish, mischievous, and not very highly developed character, apparently claimed to have been an Indian girl.
So a very distinctive personality coming through sets a particular tone for the communications.
Definitely. And the nature of these trans controls, like Fida, was a huge point of debate for the SPR.
It's a question that still resonates today, really. Were they distinct discarnate entities, like the spiritualists believed?
Oh.
Or were they merely dissociated parts of the medium's own mind, akin to secondary personalities?
Like multiple personality disorder cases.
Exactly. The sources draw parallels to famous psychological cases like Sally Beauchamp No. 2 from Dr. Morton Prince's work, a classic example of dissociation.
But was there anything differentiating the controls from those cases?
Well, one point raised was that the sex of a trance control wasn't necessarily the same as the medium's, whereas secondary personalities in clinical cases typically matched the primary sex.
Ah, okay. So that complicates a simple psychological explanation. Highlights the intricate layers involved.
It certainly does.
And that leads directly to the big question. How was the information actually being conveyed?
Right, because there was this clear reluctance to accept these trance controls at their face value.
Understandable skepticism.
So many researchers, looking for alternatives to spirits, hypothesized that the medium was simply a vehicle.
A vehicle for what?
The information, they suggested, could be received telepathically, maybe from the sitter's conscious mind or perhaps even from a third party's subconscious, and then it was just retransmitted through the control personality.
So like a complex form of internal data processing, unconsciously sifting and representing existing info rather than genuinely new content from elsewhere.
That was one prominent theory, yes. Trying to explain it without resorting to discarnate entities.
But the spiritistic hypothesis remained the main alternative, right?
It did, especially when the information coming through seemed to defy any normal way of knowing. The idea that these controls were real and separate discarnate intelligences.
Which raises that crucial question the researchers wrestled with. Which hypothesis truly covers all the facts without just cherry-picking?
Exactly. Because when you get information that no living person present knows, or information about future events, well, The simple telepathy explanation starts to feel pretty strained.
It forces you to at least consider the possibility of a truly external intelligence.
Which, if true, fundamentally alters our understanding of consciousness and survival after death. A huge implication.
Okay, now let's talk about veridical visions. These are sightings or apparitions that are later corroborated by objective, verifiable facts.
Seeing something supernormally that turns out to be real.
Precisely. Lady Trubridge's remarkable visual hallucination or vision of Miss X is a classic example from Volume 20.
Tell us about it.
Lady Trubridge was outside a garage. She was very short-sighted, apparently wearing only a monocle at the time. Yet she distinctly saw Miss X in profile.
Okay.
And she noted precise details of Miss X's attire. A thin, dark navy blue suit, and a specific black felt man's hat that she knew Miss X had only worn recently when staying at their house.
Even though she was short-sighted.
Yes. And what's more, she consciously realized that she had noticed details in a manner which exceeded normal visual powers at that distance.
Wow. Like her perception was temporarily boosted beyond her physical limits.
Exactly.
So what's the corroboration? That's the key part.
Well, this is what's truly fascinating. Miss X later confirmed she was indeed wearing a dark blue suiting coat and skirt, carrying her usual walking stick, and wearing a particular new black felt hat.
The exact outfit.
Yes. And significantly, she added she had never before this occasion worn that particular black felt hat with a dark blue suit.
So it was a unique combination seen accurately at a distance by someone short-sighted. That powerfully suggests some kind of rapport, doesn't it? A supernormal connection.
It really does. And Miss X herself had apparently claimed to sometimes appear to people in her astral, and that others had described her appearance accurately.
An extraordinary example. A vision perfectly matching an objective, unique reality. Really challenges our understanding of what it means to see something.
It really does. Then there's M. Camille Flammarion, the famous French astronomer. He presents another profoundly compelling case.
Flammarion was very involved in psychical research, too. What was his case?
It's the story of a mother who had a 2-hour vision of her deceased son.
Okay.
In the vision, he gave her precise details about his burial location in a German cemetery. Specifically, that he was buried between a Russian and a German.
Extremely specific information.
Incredibly specific. And the sheer power and clarity of this information apparently allowed her to physically locate and exhume his body from among more than 2,000 graves.
2,000 graves? That's astonishing. A story that just defies easy explanation. Comforting for the mother, maybe, but raising profound questions.
Absolutely.
Flammarion himself was deeply convinced by what he called the coercive quality of this case, meaning it was so utterly convincing it just compelled belief.
Right.
However, it also raises that important question that Hubert Wales, another SPR researcher, brought up.
Was his counter-argument.
Wales suggested it might actually be clairvoyance by the living percipient, the mother, rather than direct communication from the dead son.
Why?
Especially since the information, the burial location between two specific nationalities concerned an event after the supposed communicator's death.
Ah, so the son wouldn't have known that himself while alive.
Exactly. So if we assume survival, where does clairvoyance, seeing things remotely, end and spirit communication begin? It's a key distinction when trying to figure out the source of the info.
Is it coming from the deceased, or is the living person just accessing information supernormally?
It highlights the intense internal debates and the different interpretations within the SPR itself. They didn't always agree.
No, definitely not. And for something completely different now, tapping into a more whimsical but equally baffling type of perception. Let's turn to a child's impression of fairies.
Fairies in the SPR journal.
Apparently so. Mrs. Allen recounts her childhood memories of seeing beautiful fairies. She describes them vividly. Never old, not very young, just without age, often accompanied by faint music.
Sounds like a vivid childhood imagination.
It does. She also mentioned seeing brownies who were much bigger than fairies and denser, but she couldn't connect with them in the same way.
Okay. So what makes this more than just fantasy?
Well, this is the crucial part. She recounts being found wet through with the dew in the garden after slipping out at night to talk to them.
Wet through with dew.
Yes, and apparently she was severely scolded for it. This physical evidence being found soaking wet outside certainly complicates dismissing it as just a dream or pure imagination.
That is an interesting detail. Physical corroboration of a sort.
Sir Oliver Lodge, known for his rigor, initially suggested her experiences might have been dreams.
Understandable.
But Mrs. Allen's insistence, backed up by that physical reality of being found wet, It presents a powerful counterpoint.
What's fascinating here, then, is that enduring tension
Hmm.
between subjective, deeply felt experience and the quest for objective, verifiable proof.
How do you integrate something like that into a scientific framework?
Exactly. It highlights the challenges faced by these early researchers and really by anyone trying to study consciousness beyond purely a material explanations. It forces us to ask, what is the true nature of reality and how much is shaped by our perception, or maybe even by things beyond our usual perception?
All right, let's explore some of the most compelling and perhaps most debated forms of alleged communication from the beyond. The newspaper tests and book tests.
Ah, yes, these were designed to be evidential, trying to get specific, verifiable predictions.
Exactly. Putting the concept of communication from the deceased right to the test. Let's start with the newspaper tests conducted with Mrs. Osborne Leonard, detailed by the Reverend C. Drayton Thomas.
Okay, what was the setup?
His deceased father, speaking apparently through the medium's control theta, purportedly communicated names and phrases that would appear in the very next day's issue of the Times newspaper.
Wow. Not vague stuff, then. Specific predictions verifiable against a public document.
Precisely. That was the point.
And the specificity of the examples is really what makes them so compelling and so hard to dismiss as just chance.
Give us some examples.
Imagine this. The name Alfred William predicted to appear exactly 3 inches from the top of this column in the Times. And it did.
That precise location, too. Incredible.
Or the place name Baldock in Hertfordshire appearing, which turned out to be the town where a relevant person, Mr. Hine, resided.
Connecting to real-world facts.
Yes. And there's an instance of Louise, for Louisa, and John, his father's name, appearing together in the same advertisement. Or I of W. Isle of Wight appearing, which was his mother's native place.
These deeply personal connections.
Very. Even Cambridge appeared, noted as a place his wife was greatly attached to.
So a mix of names, places, personal relevance.
And, crucially, to add another layer of control and try to eliminate fraud or just matching things up after the fact.
What did Thomas do?
He would give copies of these predicted tests to a skeptical friend and to the SPR secretary before the newspaper was even published.
Pre-verification, locking in the prediction.
Exactly, before it could possibly be known by any normal means. A crucial step for credibility.
It makes it almost an impossible claim, doesn't it? How could that happen?
Well, Mr. Thomas himself stated quite boldly that telepathy from the living is a theory which seems to break down in the face of these experiments.
His argument being?
Given the intimate family knowledge that came through, combined with these forecasts from the next day's newspaper, it was just incredibly difficult to account for by any normal means, including telepathy between the living.
So if it wasn't telepathy from the living, and it wasn't fraud because of the pre-verification, what was the source?
That was the million-dollar question.
Did they investigate the newspaper printing process?
They did. The Society even got a response from the Times printing house about their processes.
Ah.
Well, their statement gave some insight into how and when advertisements were set, but it didn't really account for the specific content of the messages or that uncanny combination of specific names and precise locations within the paper.
So it didn't solve the mystery?
No, it really pushes that question.
Yeah.
What are the true limits of chance coincidence? At what point does the probability get so low that you have to consider other, maybe supernormal explanations?
These tests really push that boundary.
To its absolute limit, it seems.
And then we have book tests. Similar principle, equally mind-boggling.
Right. The idea here is that information from a specific book, maybe even a specific page and line number,
A book that's often closed, or maybe even in a different location entirely.
is purportedly communicated through the medium, like reading a closed book from miles away, but getting specific content from it.
Give us an example of that.
A good one is Mrs. Drummond's Via Crucis test. She received a communication, supposedly from her deceased son, Ian, about his passion for boxing.
Okay.
And then a specific verse from a book called Via Crucis was referenced, and when they found it, it turned out to be singularly apposite, very relevant to his boxing prowess.
And the key part.
Mrs. Drummond had apparently never read or even seen the book herself.
So how did the medium or the entity know the content and its relevance?
Yeah.
It points to this incredible access to information that's hard to explain normally.
As if they had access to some vast, unseen library of knowledge.
There's another fascinating case from Mr. Brooks' experiments with the Mrs. Jackson.
What could she do?
She could apparently reproduce the printed matter in a book with which she was entirely unfamiliar.
Reproduce it how? Like dictating it?
Writing it down. He gives an example from the Vicar of Wakefield. She apparently wrote verbatim passages while the book itself was in a locked bookcase at his home.
Locked?
Yes, with the key locked in his desk, and that key was with him while he was at the sitting with Mrs. Jackson.
Wow. And was it accurate?
He confirmed the material was correct when he returned home and checked. That's a serious level of information access, plucked right off the page, seemingly.
Yet even with such compelling cases, it's crucial to remember that concept of leakiness in evidence.
Leakiness, meaning?
Meaning how seemingly unexplainable information might just possibly have been acquired by normal means, however obscure or forgotten.
Right, needing to rule out everything.
C.D. Broad, a really sharp philosopher and SPR figure, critiqued one case, Miss F's Beatrice McFarlane case.
What was his critique?
He pointed out that some of the names involved were actually available in reference books like Who's Who. And perhaps more subtly, a cousin of Mr. Wales, another researcher, had actually met Miss F's brother in business.
Ah, so potential, maybe unconscious, channels for information transfer.
Exactly, however remote. And what's fascinating here is that constant, diligent effort by SPR researchers to eliminate all normal explanations before accepting a supernormal one.
It wasn't about blindly believing.
Not at all. It was about rigorous, often deeply skeptical investigation, trying to account for every possible normal avenue first. It's the scientific method at its most challenging, always pushing to rule out the conventional before accepting the extraordinary.
Okay, so we've explored the mind, telepathy, those baffling newspaper tests. But now let's step into the realm of the truly tangible physical phenomena.
Right, where things literally move on their own or manifest out of thin air, and the intense scrutiny these faced.
Let's start with poltergeists. The journal details the remarkable Hopgarten poltergeist case.
Ah, yes, Hopgarten. What made it remarkable?
Well, the phenomena were observed by multiple witnesses, crucially including police officers.
Police involvement definitely lends it credibility. What did they see or hear?
Distinct knocking sounds, objects like chairs and tables moving, even a cup falling and breaking without anyone coming into contact with them.
Spontaneous object movement. Classic poltergeist activity.
And the number of witnesses, including law enforcement, really pushed it beyond just anecdote into something needing serious investigation.
Absolutely. Was there any suspected focus for the phenomena? Often these cases center around a particular person.
Yes, what's particularly intriguing is how the sources connect these events directly to a Frau Sauerbrei being in a light dream or tri-light condition.
A trance-like state.
Essentially, yes. What they termed a hypnoidal state, semi-conscious for 17 days after her stepson had tried to hypnotize her.
So a clear link between an individual's altered state of consciousness and these bizarre physical manifestations.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if these phenomena are less about external spirits and maybe more about intense, uncontrolled, psychokinetic energy erupting from within the individual.
The mind over matter idea, but uncontrolled. Did doctors get involved?
Yes, Dr. Kahl, described as a nerve specialist, was brought in by the police.
And his take?
He initially suggested the sick woman could potentially produce some of the noises herself, maybe unconsciously.
Yeah.
And that a person in an abnormal psychical condition might be capable of performing physical feats of which they are not normally capable.
So acknowledging the potential for unusual physical effects linked to psychology.
Right. But it's noted he wasn't an eyewitness to most of the dramatic physical stuff, mainly just the knocking sounds.
So what's fascinating here is that persistent challenge, separating potential physical manifestations, like psychokinesis, moving objects with the mind from complex psychological states, or even unconscious physical actions.
It really blurs the lines between mind and matter, doesn't it?
Completely. Hashtag the enigma of materialization and stigmata.
From objects moving, let's turn now to the incredibly controversial concept of materialization.
The appearance of physical substance, sometimes even human-like forms, seemingly out of nothing, highly contentious.
Very. The journal mentions the medium Eva C., whose phenomena reportedly involved a whitish substance, sometimes called ectoplasm.
Right, Eva C. was quite famous, investigated extensively.
But it's important to note that investigations by both the SPR and the Sorbonne Committee in France often yielded almost negative results.
Meaning they couldn't replicate it reliably under strict conditions.
Exactly. These were elusive phenomena, very difficult to pin down in a lab setting, and often surrounded by suspicion of fraud.
In stark contrast, though, the physical phenomena observed with another medium, Willy S., seemed quite robust and apparently occurred under very tight controls.
Willy S., tell me more.
He actually demanded rigid control from the investigators, including having a controller hold both of his hands and forming a barrier with their legs to prevent movement.
So he welcomed scrutiny.
Seemingly so. And despite these strict conditions, observers reported distinct raps, a table creaking, and actually levitating.
Levitation under control.
According to the reports, yes. Also, a clockwork musical box playing and stopping on command, and a handbell rising vertically, swinging, and then being thrown.
All while he was supposedly immobilized.
That was the claim. The conditions were specifically designed to prevent normal trickery, which makes these accounts particularly compelling, if accurate, suggests a genuine physical effect.
And the investigators themselves, what was their conclusion about Willy S.?
They were very clear. They made a strong claim that, given the strict control, they even used luminous bracelets on his wrists to ensure his hands were always visible in the dim light.
Okay, tracking his movements.
It was simply impossible for Willy S. to produce these telekinetic phenomena normally.
Impossible. That's a powerful statement from scientific observers, implying they genuinely believed an external unseen force was at play.
It is a very strong conclusion based on their observations under control.
Okay, shifting now to another fascinating physiological phenomenon discussed. Stigmatization.
The appearance of bodily wounds, often corresponding to the wounds of Christ, spontaneously without physical cause.
Right. Father Thurston, a researcher known for being skeptical but thorough, claimed that bleeding stigmata have never been experimentally produced.
Challenging the idea that they could just be psychosomatically induced. Mind over matter causing actual wounds.
Exactly. He set up a really interesting debate about the limits of the mind's influence over the physical body.
But the sources push back on that, don't they? There's counter-evidence presented.
Yes. Hubert Wales argued against Thurston's claim. He referenced cases mentioned in Meyer's Human Personality where hemorrhage and bleeding stigmata were apparently produced by verbal suggestion alone.
Just through suggestion. Hypnosis, maybe?
Seems like it. There's even an anecdote shared about Père Coccanier visiting Dr. Charcot's famous institute in Paris.
Charcot, the neurologist who influenced Freud.
Right. And there, apparently, a girl's arm was marked with a cross, causing bleeding simply through hypnotic suggestion.
Wow. So, direct evidence suggesting a very powerful link between mind and body, far beyond what most people might think possible.
It certainly seems that way.
Father Thurston, however, added a crucial nuance to this, didn't he? He refined his point.
How so?
While he acknowledged that suggestion could cause blood exudation, like sweating blood almost,
Okay.
he questioned if it could cause actual rending asunder of the tissues, real deep wounds, or the perfect reunion of those tissues in an abnormally short time, which was sometimes reported in religious cases.
Ah, so he drew a line between circus bleeding and deep tissue damage and rapid healing.
Exactly, which raises that important question still debated today.
Yeah.
What are the true physiological limits of psychosomatic effects? Can the mind really alter the body to that extreme extent?
Causing deep wounds and then miraculous healing? Or is there a line beyond which other explanations are needed?
It forces us to confront the incredible and sometimes, frankly, unsettling power of belief and suggestion on our physical bodies.
Okay, now for perhaps one of the most controversial and often debunked areas of psychical research we've touched on, spirit photography.
Ah, yes, where extras, these ethereal, often translucent figures, would appear in photographs alongside the living sitters.
A prominent figure here, mentioned in the journal, was Mr. William Hope of Crewe.
The Crewe Circle. Very famous, very controversial. This was a real battleground between believers and skeptics.
A constant cat-and-mouse game of evidence and accusation, it sounds like.
It really was. And a key figure in the skeptical camp was William Marriott. He famously conducted an experiment in faking spirit photographs.
To show how it could be done normally.
Exactly. To demonstrate that extras could be faked using normal photographic trickery, effectively debunking the claims.
How did his experiment go?
Well, during his demonstration, observers noted some suspicious things, like a round object in the breast pocket of his coat at one point, and a discrepancy about the handling of the dark slide for the photographic plate, suggesting maybe some manipulation was happening right there. Sleight of hand. That was the implication. Hints of trickery.
And Marriott himself was quite bold in his claims, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. He stated that he could produce just as beautiful mystic clouds as Mr. Hope.
Basically saying, anything Hope can do, I can fake, and I'll show you how. a direct challenge.
Absolutely. A direct challenge to the legitimacy of the whole field, or that part of it anyway.
Did he explain how he did it?
He later offered a confession, or maybe better described as a detailed demonstration, of how he accomplished his trick.
Which involved?
He explained his reliance on misdirection, specifically switching a blackened card, likely a pre-exposed plate or something similar, into the dark slide while his collaborator was distracted.
Classic conjuring technique.
Pretty much. His confident assertion was, "Nothing hitherto done by Hope cannot be repeated by myself under the same conditions."
A powerful public challenge. Suggesting cunning and sleight of hand could account for it all.
It certainly casts significant doubt.
Yet, other researchers offered counterarguments, right? The debate wasn't completely settled by Marriott.
No, it wasn't. Major Spencer, for instance, noted that some of Hope's results would baffle the cleverest workers in photography, and that microscopic examination fails to find evidence of the employment of normal human action, like double exposure or substitution.
So some experts felt Hope's photos resisted easy explanation.
Yes. There was also the criticism that Marriott's own demonstrations weren't conducted slowly and openly before expert photographers, implying he still used conditions that favored his tricks, not necessarily the same conditions Hope worked under.
So the debate wasn't settled just by Marriott's claims. There was still a strong contingent arguing Hope's work defied normal explanation.
Exactly. The controversy continued.
But perhaps the most damning evidence against some of these claims, specifically involving Hope's circle, comes from that Crew Circle fraud case investigated by Harry Price.
Ah, yes, Price's investigation. What did he find? In that instance, the paper wrapping and the seals on the photographic plates provided for the sitting were found to have been tampered with.
Tampered with how? Before the sitting?
Yes. The implication was strong that pre-prepared plates, already containing fraudulent extras, had been substituted before the sitting even began, swapping the official plates for faked ones.
That's pretty conclusive evidence of fraud in that case.
It certainly appears so. And what's truly fascinating here is just observing this intense, ongoing cat-and-mouse game between the mediums, or alleged mediums, and the investigators.
It underscores the extreme difficulty of getting conclusive proof, one way or the other, when fraud was a constant and often very clever possibility.
Absolutely. It reminds us that for every genuine mystery, there's often a mundane explanation lurking. The real challenge is telling the difference.
Okay, as we approach the end of our deep dive into Volume 20, let's briefly broaden the scope. Let's see how psychical research intersected with wider cultural beliefs and anthropology.
Right, because these phenomena don't exist in a vacuum.
The journal sometimes reviewed works like Margaret Alice Murray's The Witch Cult in Western Europe. That shows an awareness of how these ideas connected to history and anthropology.
It wasn't just about lab experiments. It was about understanding the human experience in all its diverse forms across time and culture.
Exactly.
And this connection becomes even more vivid when we look at that article titled "The Were-Tigers of the Assam Hills."
Were-Tigers, that sounds amazing. What was it about?
It explored the beliefs of the Naga people in Assam, specifically their concept of the external soul and leopard men or tiger men.
External soul.
Yes, the belief that individual souls could be, in a sense, projected into a specific tiger or leopard out in the wild.
Wow. What did that connection mean?
The belief was that this deep link allowed the person to know the animal's actions, almost as if they were experiencing them directly, even when physically separate.
A shared consciousness, almost.
Something like that. And what's truly fascinating here is how these cultural beliefs about a separable, projectable soul resonate with some of the more speculative theories explored in psychical research itself, like apparitions at a distance or out-of-body experiences.
And how they challenge our conventional Western understanding of identity and consciousness being strictly locked inside the skull.
Precisely. It makes you wonder how much of what we label supernormal is simply an aspect of human experience understood and integrated differently in other cultures.
Were there specific stories or accounts shared in the article?
Oh, yes. Incredibly compelling anecdotal evidence that really brings the belief system to life.
Like what?
There's the story of Zetoy, a Sima youth, who suddenly, to his great distress, became a leopard man. He didn't choose it, it just happened. He just knew when his leopard counterpart killed a calf. He was even able to direct searchers to the carcass, even though he hadn't physically been there.
That's incredible. Knowing through the animal senses.
That's the implication. Then there's Sai of Zumethi, a known tiger man. He apparently announced to his friends that his tiger had been wounded and took to his bed, becoming ill himself right after a specific tiger was shot in the area.
A sympathetic connection.
Seems so. Even more dramatically, a man from Lizutomi reportedly fell down and died on the spot simply upon hearing that his personal leopard cat had been killed.
Died from the shock of the connection being severed.
That's the interpretation. And one more, Cheki, a tiger man, who refused to spear a tigress during a hunt, stating, "I did not like to spear her as I thought she was probably a friend of mine."
A sense of kinship with the animal soul partner. These aren't just quaint stories. They speak to a deeply integrated, lived experience of these beliefs.
Where the boundaries between self and other, human and animal, seem genuinely porous, almost dissolved. And these accounts, while culturally specific, they really invite us to consider the broader implications for our understanding of consciousness and its potential reach.
How so?
Well, how these beliefs about a separable soul resonate with psychical research theories. If a portion of our consciousness can indeed extend beyond our physical body, if we can have these deep, almost symbiotic connections with other living beings.
Then it opens up a vast new landscape for exploration.
Exactly. One that transcends cultural boundaries and really challenges our ingrained Western understanding of identity and self. It's a powerful reminder that there are many ways of knowing and potentially many realities to explore.
Wow. We've really journeyed through a fascinating world today, haven't we? A world where pioneering scientists grappled head-on with the seemingly supernatural.
Where meticulous records were kept of the inexplicable.
And where the very boundaries of human perception and even physical reality were constantly being challenged. It's been a truly captivating look at a time when the inexplicable wasn't just immediately dismissed.
No, it was rigorously pursued, or at least that was the aim.
Yeah.
What's really clear from exploring Volume 20 of the journal is the immense dedication these researchers had, trying to understand these phenomena, whether they pointed to new, undiscovered faculties of the mind.
Or perhaps compelling evidence of communication with discarnate entities, however controversial.
Right. The journal itself really stands as a testament to humanity's enduring curiosity about what lies just beyond our immediate grasp.
And the critical importance of rigorous investigation, even when the answers remain elusive and the mechanisms totally unknown.
They were seeking truth wherever it led them. And that commitment, I think, is an inspiration even now.
So you've heard about the controlled experiments, the baffling spontaneous occurrences, the intense debates within this fascinating field.
It's not just about historical oddities, is it?
No, it really touches on the very nature of consciousness, of perception, and the potential for realities far beyond what we typically perceive in our day-to-day lives.
And think about this. If a subject under hypnosis can exhibit bleeding stigmata from just a suggestion,
Or if a medium can seemingly predict next day's newspaper headlines with such uncanny accuracy.
what does that imply about the latent powers hidden within each of us? Or about the fundamental interconnectedness of all minds?
Big questions.
Huge questions. And how much of what we currently dismiss as impossible is merely waiting for the right scientific lens, the right approach, or perhaps just a more open mind to be finally understood?
This deep dive really reminds us that the universe, and our place within it, might be far stranger and maybe more wonderful than we currently allow ourselves to imagine.
Well said.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an open mind about the incredible world around and perhaps within you.